I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this episode, we'll open with an announcement regarding the Read and Reaction Season Preview Magazine. We'll talk about the spring game, Orange 10, Blue 7 for 4 bits. Plus, we got 2 more commits on the way, including one major recruit out of the state of Texas. Will, that's 2 of the top 7 players in Texas now in this class of 2024. Will, we have some football to talk about. It's not just off-season stuff this week. A little bit of football to talk about in this episode.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, obviously, I think we would like to see more than 10-7, but it is what it is. And I think last week I said I want to see a stop, so we saw some stops from the defense, saw some pressure from the defense, saw a lot about what Austin Armstrong is going to be bringing to the table. I think, including some interesting antics after the game. But hey, it was a good time by all, keeping everybody interested, and it was fun to see. Always fun to have new stuff on tape.
More cameras at the University of Florida, aren't there, Mr. Armstrong? But hey, I loved his presence on the sideline. I think he's going to be a blast to watch this year. He brings a ton of energy. I think Pete Thamel at one point called him a human can of Red Bull.
I mean, he
Perfect.
reminds you a lot of like Will Muschamp when Muschamp was like 28,
Yeah.
29 years old, right? Just like going nuts over there. Doesn't care who sees him on the camera, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, look, I think I am dubious that the pressure he's going to try to bring is going to work long term, but it's going to be better this year, I think, and we can even see that in the game. We'll get to that, but look. I think it's an interesting opening salvo for him in the spring game, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, let's open the show here with a quick announcement about the 2023 Read and Reaction Preview Magazine. We're going to be opening it up for pre-order sales. I'll let you fill people in on the details.
Yeah, so the official launch date is Memorial Day, right? So that's the official launch date. We're going to offer it this year in both digital and hard copy. And so, the digital might have a couple of extra things in it, but really, we had a lot of people last year ask us for hard copy. That's why we're asking for your address if you sign up, so that we can send it your way. But what we're asking people to do is we're going to give a discount for people who pre-order it before May 1st. That way, we'll sort of know what the demand is. We can get those things printed up, get those things shipped out, get them ordered, and make sure they actually get there by Memorial Day. We think it's an awesome Father's Day gift. So, if you've got a kid that you think might like it, if you're a kid who thinks your dad might like it, it'd be a great thing to get as a hard copy thing that you could give to somebody before Father's Day. We sort of culled it down a little bit this year. It's not going to be the 150 pages that it was last year. It's probably going to be more like the 70 to 75 range. But that 70-75 is going to be, we think, a lot of what the best content was last year, along with some added stuff. We're doing some film stuff that's going to include, diagrams. You're going to be able to go to the actual YouTube clip and look at the play that's been diagrammed in the magazine, as well as some statistical analysis on recruiting and all sorts of other stuff. So the stuff you really sort of hopefully have come to love from Read and Reaction are the things we're going to be giving you. But again, if you want to order, you can go to readandreaction.com/mag, M-A-G, just like last year. So readandreaction.com/mag. We'll also be sending out email blasts to people who are on our email list. We'll certainly be pushing it here on YouTube. And then if you ordered last year, you'll be getting an email as well, because we really do appreciate that you helped us out. We're going to be giving a discount for people who order before May 1st. After May 1st, the price is going to go up. You indicate whether you want hard copy, digital copy, or both, and there'll be options for all that stuff there. And we really, really appreciate everybody supporting us. We think it's going to be really cool this year. But like I said, we got a lot of people requesting a hard copy last year. We've worked pretty hard to make that happen this year. It's not an easy thing to go work through that sort of stuff. And, we went through all sorts of options. Or were we going to try to put it in like Publix and Walmart and that sort of stuff? Were we going to go to a printer and have 10,000 copies printed and all sorts of stuff? We sort of settled on something in between this year, but we're confident that if we get those orders by May 1st, we will be able to get them to you by Memorial Day. So we're excited about it. I think you and I are both tired because we're writing all the content, but we're excited about it. We hope people like the product. And, I think there are reasons to be excited, but you want to set your expectations. And so that's what we're going to try to do, is look at all the numbers, look at all the different things that are going on within the program, and then set expectations for the year so that people can come in with realistic expectations for this team, but also realistic expectations for the program. So again, if you want to order before Memorial Day or before May 1st, go over to readandreaction.com/mag. If you order after May 1st, it may come to you after Memorial Day. And then also the price is going to go up after that.
Yeah, my wife always tells me that the biggest lie I told her before we got married was that football was only a thing for me during football season. So we're spending a lot of time on this magazine at nights right now. A lot of late nights going in because we are reducing the page count to about 70-75 pages. We haven't settled on an exact one, but the challenge is this year we're cutting all the fat from last year. So like last year we went through detailed roster. We were super detailed last year, and it was a lot of fun to bring you those 150 pages. But you're cutting that almost in half. What we're making a point to make every single one of those pages count this year.
Yeah, we think it'll be worth your while.
Yeah.
The hope is that you'll pick it up in May and be excited about what's coming. But somebody will say something to you in June or July, and you'll go, well, actually, and you'll go back and pick it up and say, I don't agree with that, or I do agree with that, based on what the stats say about from last year and some of the guys who are coming in. Certainly, there's a lot of questions about the quarterback position, so we'll delve into that. And the reason you said we're still working on it, we don't know what the page count is because the transfer portal is coming up. And so one of the things we're going to be doing is putting finishing touches on stuff as we find out who comes in through the transfer portal. And so, getting all that stuff to fit within the timing of having the launch and those sorts of things, it has been a little bit complicated, but we're going to get it done. And hopefully everybody likes having something in your hands. Certainly, we're going to be ordering them for ourselves just to have on the bookshelf and something we've accomplished and put out there. So, really excited for people to get their hands on this, excited to see what the feedback is. And certainly if you want to support us, you can do that by going and pre-ordering. That will help us there at readandreaction.com/mag. And, we appreciate everyone's support, and hopefully this is something everybody else is excited for as well.
Yeah, check out the link. Well, we will add the link in the comments here for this video, but we will also be bringing it up for the next several weeks as well. But one of the reasons, Will, you might want to order this magazine is that there are a lot of new faces this year for this 2023 Gator football team, and we saw them on display here in the spring game, moving on here to 4 bits. And I will tell you what, a lot of young guys making plays on the field. That was the number one thing that jumped out to me about the spring game. I know a lot of people want to focus on the quarterbacks and the defense and what does this mean, but the one thing that really caught my attention across the board above all else, you saw Castell early on making a play on a ball, breaking up a pass. Jaden Robinson making a couple plays near pick before halftime there. We'll get to the offense here after, so we'll just focus on the defensive side here first. But like we mentioned before we got into this here, Austin Armstrong, just a ball of energy on the sideline, saw some good pressure off the edge. That defensive front will very stout throughout the night. It's a new, we talked about it. The offensive line, we believe in what they built there, but they're turning over a lot of guys. Their first outing, in a live type scrimmage like that in front of an audience. So probably some more work to do on that offensive front, but the defensive line made them work all night. And you saw, I believe on one of the third, it was a third down where Kelby Collins stretched out a play, made a nice tackle on the end, but a lot of presence. You saw Caleb Banks make some plays. I love that you heard a lot of new names being called throughout the entire night on Thursday from that defensive unit.
Well, there have to be new names because everybody transferred out or graduated who was on that defense last year.
They were making plays though too. It wasn't just that there's new names. New names making plays.
Look, there were 9 sacks, there were 14 tackles for loss, there were 11 quarterback hits, and there were 5 pass breakups. And there was at no point, I think 9 sacks, that would have been halfway to last year's total. Now, granted, you're playing on both sides of the ball. The offensive line was struggling. There were some guys who were gone. A couple of those sacks were bad snaps that the quarterbacks had to struggle with. So look, it's just like any sort of scrimmage. You're going to have some hiccups. With having Kingsley Eggleton out meant that you had a lot of Rod Kearney there at center, a lot of bad snaps. That's something that they're going to have to fix, obviously. But I think the big thing that you saw flashes of athleticism from guys like Manny Nunnery, from guys like Human Milan and Sapp, right? Who were able to both get sacks and tackles for loss at the defensive line position. Miguel Mitchell and Kamari Wilson looked pretty good. Jalen Kimber and Shamar James looked good. Both had 6 tackles each. So you start looking at what was happening as things were going. The highlight I actually put in, I put 2 highlights in my recap article. One was was Scooby Williams coming in, and he had it was a running play, and he had correct technique on the running play that allowed him to shed the blocker. And there was William Harrod that he shed, so it wasn't somebody who, or no, Richie Leonard that he shed, so it wasn't somebody who hasn't had any playing time. So an experienced guy that Scooby Williams came in, took on correctly. So what you don't want to do as a linebacker is you don't want to let the offensive lineman get both of his hands on you and really cover you completely up. You want to take him on with one shoulder and leave the other shoulder free. Scooby Williams does that in a situation where he has to do it in order to fill the gap that he's supposed to fill, does it perfectly. Etienne ran into him and drove him back 3 yards, but he was in the right spot. There was a play later that I highlighted. I think it was Boone. It was Justice Boone who played it was a read option type of look, played it perfectly. They were trying to run a flood concept with a boot, and Boone got right in the quarterback's face, made him make an errant throw. You look at the quarterback throw and you go, that's kind of rough, but it was rough because Justice Boone was there. So those types of things, when you hear people talk about Florida's defense starting to get it, when you ask the offensive players, what's the difference between the defense this year and last year, what they will tell you is they are understanding the defense in a way that they didn't last year. We saw that in this game. And granted, the quarterbacks kind of made it look that way too. But, that's always the question when you get in the spring game. Is it more the defense excelling or is it the offense struggling? I think in this case, it's a little bit of both. But given how much the defense struggled last year, I think it's an encouraging thing to see the amount of pressure they were getting. And quite honestly, the fact that they were not getting gashed in the running game either. Because if you look at last year's defense was like 97th overall in the country in yards per play allowed on the ground. So they were getting gashed on the ground. And the two games that they played well in last year on the defensive side of the ball were Kentucky and South Carolina. And those were the two worst teams in terms of yards per rush attempt in the SEC. And so when they were able to stop the run, Florida's defense was able to at least do something useful. The minute they couldn't stop the run, they got gashed. And so you got to give up something. And I think what we saw was more fundamentally sound play up front, even though these are younger players. And so that to me gives a lot of encouragement heading into a year where, look, Florida's schedule is pretty difficult. And so they're going to need to have an offense, or they're going to need to have a defense that's probably better than middle of the pack. But, look, they won 6 games last year with a defense that was dead last, like worse than Vanderbilt. And so, just improving to middle of the pack or slightly above middle of the pack is going to give them a shot to have a, depending upon what you think about the season, but 7, 8 wins, pretty successful season in year 2 under Billy Napier.
Not a ton of fireworks on the offensive side of the football, but the one player that absolutely jumped out to me was Mizell. He, on the first play from the line of scrimmage, draws a defensive pass interference because there was a couple times where people just grabbed him because he's just running straight by people. That guy's going to be a problem with the deep ball this year if we have someone that can connect with him on the deep ball. But it's also, I also thought that was a sign of good coaching too with the corners too, that they were actually just reaching out and grabbing him rather than letting him go by for an easy catch as well. Because hey, take the 15-yard penalty in college, but Mizell put a lot of pressure in a couple different situations with that deep ball, Will.
Yeah, well, that was something you noticed definitely was there were a lot of flags for pass interference, but that also means that your corners are like in the vicinity. And last year, the corners weren't even in the vicinity, and so they didn't get a lot of pass interference calls. There were some pass interference calls that were killers on the linebackers, but I don't really remember a ton of pass interference calls on corners, maybe on safeties too. I think there was one against Georgia on Perkins, or maybe that was against Tennessee, but one on Perkins, it was just a killer. But beyond that, there's a difference between you're in one-on-one coverage, the guy completely turns you around, you grab him, you take the 15 yards, versus you're not technically sound when there's a throw in the guy's direction and you yank him on the hip and turn him, and all of a sudden you get a pass interference on like a 3rd and 20. So when those penalties occur will probably be more important than whether they occur. But the fact that they were occurring and that there's an aggression on the defense that just didn't seem like there was there, I think is an important point to make. Look, I think we all knew Ricky Pearsall is the guy who's going to lead these receivers. He had 4 receptions for 62 yards in this one. If you look, Mizell actually didn't have a catch, but like you said, he still made an impact. And so
still stood out a couple different times.
Well, look, Arliss Boardingham had 3 for 33. You had Caleb Douglas, 2 for 51. So you had some guys who were starting to get out there and contribute, and that's great. But it's going to come down to Pearsall, Henderson, and then whoever that third guy is. And if that third guy is a burner on the outside who all of a sudden puts a different kind of pressure on the defense, then yeah, that's going to be a big difference maker. And that's something that Mizell can bring. Everybody who's talked about him has said he's the fastest guy out there, the fastest guy on the team.
Mhm.
Even when they interviewed, I think, Henderson last week, and he was like, yeah, it's myself. He's the fastest guy on the
Yeah.
team. He just has a different gear. So, hey, that's great, right? I mean, we're starting to see a buildup of skill players on the offensive side of the ball. And you even saw it in this game. ETN is a different running back. Like, Montreal Johnson is a good running back. Trayon Webb looked pretty good. Carroll looked pretty good.
Carroll had some nice runs. I thought he stood out in the running back room.
But ETN is a different animal at running
Oh
back.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why he returns kicks, because his vision is just something that you can't teach. And so with him, Pearsall, and Mizell, I think you start to have sort of the crux of a good offense. The problem is the guy's pulling the trigger, right? And that's the thing, that if you just look at the offensive side, you mentioned the struggles that they had on that side. That's where it is. I mean,
Mhm.
look, Mertz 18 to 29 for 244 yards and a touchdown. You actually look at that and go, well, that's not terrible. The quarterback rating's 144. Problem is, you had 7 sacks for minus 27 yards as well. And so, this is the point that I always try to make with my yards above replacement stat, is that sacks are just as much a quarterback decision making stat as they are an offensive line stat. And so, yes, a guy like Anthony Richardson can run his way out of sacks and help himself out, but that's part of where he brings value, right? Is that even if he just runs out of the way, doesn't get sacked, and chucks the ball into the stands, it's now 2nd and 10 rather than 2nd and 22. And there were a lot of 2nd and 22s the other night that were there because of Mertz. So the 244 yards, averaging 8.4 yards per attempt, completing 62% of his throws, that was all very good. The fact that you didn't see turnovers through the air, also very good. But the sacks are just a killer. And if you use yards above replacement, he ends up negative 0.6 for the game. Now, Jack Miller, 10 of 20 for 144 yards and a touchdown. So 50% completion, average 7.2 yards per attempt. He had 6 rushes for 3 yards. So he was able to make up for the sack yardage by having a couple of nice runs, a couple of nice scrambles. So he ends up at negative 0.7 when it comes to yards. So basically right where Mertz was. So anyone who says Mertz separated himself, I think through the air, they're actually right. But overall, in terms of total contribution to the offense, there were times where Miller was driving the offense better than Mertz, especially in the first half. And we need to acknowledge that. Now, one thing I think we should say is that Miller's line last year was 13 of 23 for 121. This year he's 10 of 20 for 144. So that's the thing that worries me a little bit about the defensive performance, is Miller struggled against this defense last year. Miller struggled against the defense this year. If Miller has taken a significant step forward and the defense was still able to stop him, then that's great. If Miller's the same exact guy he was last year, then that's a problem. But, you could see it all night long. The quarterbacks were hesitant. They were not getting the ball out on time. Even I think I texted you right at the end of the game, and had gone back and watched the touchdown pass that Miller had thrown. I highlighted this in the article as well. It was open from the jump, and he was looking in the wrong direction, and he should have switched back to the other side really quickly, and he didn't do it. And so, you can get away with that every once in a while, but you don't get away with that against Georgia, right? And so
Which is a bummer of a point, because that touchdown throw where you're rolling out to the right and he hits him in the back of the end zone was such a nice throw that he made. But to your point, if he reads it quicker, maybe you don't have to roll out right and make such a great throw.
Well, and the bomb to Pearsall right before the half. I mean, that was
Right.
one where Pearsall is
Had to
open.
completely stop. Yeah.
He's a yard past him, and the ball, if the ball's thrown up 30 yards, where it's a 30-yard pass instead of a 40-yard pass, you don't have to get as much on it, right? You can just lead him down the sideline, and you probably get it out to him before anybody can catch him. Now, look, there's always the chance you might overthrow him. Sometimes you actually want to just get the 40 yards on the throw. The problem is you could see Mertz double clutch on the play. So he sees it come open, and then he doesn't trust himself to let it go. And maybe that's because he's still learning the offense. But maybe it's because that's sort of the thing that happens with Mertz and Miller, and that's why they struggle, is the ball comes out late. So I think that's going to be the determining factor in terms of who wins the starting job, is going to be who becomes the person who's more decisive. Because when they were decisive, they were very effective. When they had to go to their second or third read, and this is the interesting thing about the Florida defense in the game, when the Florida defense did something post-snap, so they showed something pre-snap and then changed it post-snap or right before the snap, the quarterbacks really struggled. And, look, that's indicative of not understanding the offense. They talked a lot about Mertz saying that, or Miller saying that he knew the offense now, so he was focused a lot on the defense. I didn't see that. What I saw was somebody who's still sort of struggling with what the actual offense is asking him to do. And I know there's a lot of talk about the offense being vanilla, but that worries me even more, because if the offense is vanilla and you still don't have the concepts down in terms of where you should go against various defenses, then what happens when it gets more complex? So I think they're going to have some window dressing this year if these are their quarterbacks. If one of these guys ends up being the starter, they're going to have a lot of stuff to sort of help the quarterback along. And having guys like ETN and Pearsall and Mizell is really going to help. But you don't have the trigger man this year like you have in the past. And I think it's not a secret that Florida's going to be in the market for a guy in the transfer portal. And, there's even been talk about Austin Simmons potentially reclassifying in 2023. I don't imagine he would consider doing that if he's not going to have an opportunity to compete for the job. So, look, there's a lot of interesting stuff still to come on the quarterback position.
What are the odds that we see, assuming we don't pick up anybody in the portal, assuming Simmons does not reclassify, what are the odds we see both Miller and Mertz in game 1 against Utah?
Honestly, I think Miller's going to win the job. And I think most people look at Mertz and think he has the better arm talent, which is true. They think he has the better pedigree, which is true. But Miller, the way he runs the ball, he's going to keep you from getting in 3rd and 17 on a regular basis. I think Mertz is going to put him in 3rd and 17 sometimes. You saw that when he was at Wisconsin. And I mean, he was in the shotgun, but he was still late getting the ball out sometimes. He was still inconsistent. There were times where he did really, really good things. But there were times where he did stuff that you just went, yeah, you can't do that when you've been a 3-year starter. And so that's the thing. So look, if I had to choose between those two today, based on what I saw in this game, based on their time already in college, and based on their high school profiles, I would say Miller is the guy who's got the higher ceiling, because his running is going to keep you in 3rd and 2, 3rd and 6, even 3rd and 9 situations instead of 3rd and 12, 3rd and 16, 3rd and 20. And 3rd and 20, 3rd and 16, that's where you get turnovers. That's where you get the back-breaking stuff. You get in that situation, it completely kills drives. You're at the opponent's 27-yard line, and you take a sack, and all of a sudden now it's a 50-yard field goal. And given what we saw in this game, a 50-yard field goal is not going to be a sure thing for this team. So, I think if you asked me who's going to start of these two, I'd say it's Miller. But again, I haven't seen everything in practice either. But it was telling. I saw a couple of beat writers who were sort of snarkily, tongue in cheek, tweeting about, and you people got mad at us when we were showing videos of throws from the quarterbacks behind the receivers, right?
Well, we saw one with Mertz to Henderson. Henderson had a step on the guy, and if it's a good throw, Henderson might have taken it the distance. Mertz had it a little behind and kind of threw it. It kind of really threw it in there pretty hard for no reason. He could have just kind of laid it up for Henderson. It would have been a nice, easy touchdown. And look, I'm with you. I don't think these quarterbacks look totally comfortable all night. Part of it, though, Napier even commented after the game, part of it was that the offensive line was just under siege for most of the night. There was a lot of pressure up the middle too. They kept calling it a muddy pocket there for the quarterbacks. I feel like they used that phrase about like 15 times on the broadcast. They fell in love with that phrase a little bit, but Napier definitely referred to that as well. So got to keep that in mind as well. So it wasn't the best protection on the night, but I'm with you because of that. I think Miller stood out a little more to me simply because of the mobility he brings to the table. And I think you're going to see both of these guys in 2023. I think you have two high-level backup quarterbacks for, if you're talking about championship level football, right? These guys would be high-level backups for a championship level team. Neither one of these would be the starting quarterback for a championship level team, but they're two high-level backups, and certainly they're capable of starting games. But I mean, 2023 is going to be, you got to go with the guy that's going to give you the best shot game to game. Maybe it's drive to drive. It wouldn't surprise me if Napier had packages for Miller. Like if you get into the red zone and you want to use Miller's running ability a little bit, maybe Mertz is your guy going down the field and you throw Miller in the red zone. It wouldn't surprise me to see a little bit of both this year.
Yeah, we'll see. I think there's so much that can happen because of the transfer portal at this point that I'm not willing. I don't think either one of these performances is going to make the coaches go, well, we don't need anybody else. I think if anything, it might accelerate the fact that we do need somebody else. And there are going to be people who come free, right? There are going to be quarterbacks who
didn't we know that? Didn't we know that already? Did we need the spring game to learn that?
No, but it confirmed it.
Okay.
And so, I mean, look, there's been a lot of talk. The minute Mertz transferred, a lot of people were like, well, it's the Wisconsin offense. It's the Wisconsin offense. Well, the Florida offense looked a lot like the Wisconsin offense the other night because the quarterbacks wound up in 3rd and long a lot. And I hear what people are saying about the offensive line, but it's not like these guys were getting hit. So if you're seeing ghosts when you got a black jersey on, like that's a problem. And the other thing is that
you think it's seeing ghosts, or that there was legitimate, like, their pockets collapsing around these
the
guys on a
pocket
regular basis here,
the
where it's
pocket.
not.
Look, if you go back and look at it, the ball was coming out late consistently. And so
Bad combination.
There were multiple sacks where if the quarterback had gotten rid of the ball on time, no one would have said anything about the defensive line getting there. There were a couple of times where the defensive line just got there, but I would say there were probably 4, maybe 5 sacks the entire night that were sacks that were specifically just on the offensive line. Now, look, 5 sacks in a game, still bad, but it's not like you got a helmet in the back, right? Like, it's not something where you're getting hurt and you're feeling it and they've sort of announced their presence of authority and you're going to get skittish back there. At least you shouldn't. It's just, it's a scrimmage. You didn't get hit. They blew the whistle and called it a sack. And, you know, there are things you should do otherwise. And one of those things is, there were a bunch of times where the running back was open. And that's one thing that when you go back and look at the film, if you go back and look at it, there are a bunch of times where Armstrong's defense was very aggressive and forgot to pick up the running back out of the backfield. And at no point did the quarterbacks just dump it off to ETN or Johnson or Webb or Carroll and let them run, because they would have had a 10-yard head start on anybody who was anywhere near them. You know, again, scrimmage, I get what you're trying to do. You want to get through your progressions, but that's the thing, is when you're slow through your progressions, these things are timed out, right? So if you've got crossing routes with then someone running a hook behind, and there was a play where they ran that, where they had these crossing routes across the middle and then a hook behind. It's a play they ran against Tennessee last year to try to get a first down. If you've already bells from the pocket before the guy hooks around, then you're screwed. You're never going to be able to make that first down, because the play, if you're going against a zone defense, those crossers don't do you any good. They're man beaters. And so you need that hook behind the man beaters in order to isolate the zone. And so what you end up with is a very difficult throw to the sideline that almost is never going to be complete, or you have to dump the ball away. So I agree with you that there was a lot of pressure, but a muddy pocket is the reality in the SEC. And you need to be able to go bam, bam, bam in your progressions and get the ball out, especially if you're not mobile. So Mertz, not being that mobile of a guy, needs to go 1, 2, 3 balls out every time. And even if that just means the ball gets chucked down at his running back's feet because his running back's right around there. You see that all the time with like Peyton Manning when he was quarterback, where he just like takes one step back and then chucks it right at his running back's feet. What has he accomplished? Well, he's accomplished that it's 2nd and 10 rather than 2nd and 18. And those sorts of things seem like minor details. Those are major details. That's the whole point behind yards above replacement, is that I think sacks, especially in college, are a quarterback stat. I think there are times where the defense just wins every once in a while. But I think for the most part, it's, did you get through your progressions fast enough? Did you get the ball out quickly? And neither one of those guys did that the other night. So, yeah. Can they? Yeah, absolutely they can. That's a development thing. The problem is that I saw the same thing in Miller last year. If you go back and read my spring game recap, the difference between him and Anthony Richardson in that game was Richardson was getting the ball out fast. And, you know, look, Richardson ends up being a guy who doesn't get sacked very often last year. Very inconsistent, but didn't get sacked very much last year. You go and look at the game against Oregon State. Again, the ball kind of comes out late. You look at this spring game, the ball's coming out late. So there's a lot of work to be done here. Again, I think the transfer portal is going to be big for Florida. And like I mentioned earlier, Simmons potentially reclassifying as well. He's not going to reclassify if he doesn't think he can compete for the job. I don't think they're going to guarantee him the job, but I think they're going to give him the opportunity to compete if he reclassifies, and more competition would be better, obviously.
Also, one of the last note here on the spring game here, I want to shout out the Marcus Burt touchdown catch, but the Tyrone Prothro hug catch on Jakeem Jackson was awesome. That was a great play by Burke. And boy, that's a receiver that if we can get him to step up this year, he's certainly physically, there's no doubt that this guy is capable, but we just haven't seen it yet on the field.
Look, I mean, he's been the guy who everybody's talked about being a burner prior to Mizell getting there. And so Florida is going to have to piece together multiple guys who can go out there and do all of the different things that you need to do. And so Burke and Mizell at one position is the burners. Pearsall is the guy who's sort of the all-purpose receiver. Henderson is the guy who's going to get the screen passes and all those sorts of things. Critical. Having Burke being able to go up and get it, awesome. The question to me is going to be, can he block? Right? Because what they're going to want to do in this offense is there are going to be times where you got numbers on the outside, ball's going to get chucked out in that direction, and the wide receiver has to block. It's very similar to in the Dan Mullen offense, the running back had to block, which is a reason why there were guys who didn't get on the field very often early on at running back, even though they might have been more gifted players, because they weren't good in pass protection. They weren't effective blockers, those sorts of things. Same thing at the wide receiver position. And Napier mentioned after the game, just the level of maturity for Burke over the last year, how much progress he's made there. And so I think when he's talking about that, he's really talking about knowing the playbook, being willing to block, so that then when they call your number and chuck it deep, you'll be available to get that. Now, look, I mean, I said something to, I think, Dave on Gators Breakdown last week that Dante Zanders was the best receiver on the field last year during the spring game. And we saw what happened during the year. So we do need to be very, very careful that this entire game is a caveat. At the same time, when you see stuff sort of consistently over and over, and it sort of reinforces tape you've already seen, that's when you start to look at stuff. So the sacks and all that sort of stuff are really encouraging because it's not something we've seen on tape previously. It's something new. You look at the quarterbacks, we've seen hesitation from these guys in the past. We're seeing hesitation now. So it sort of reinforces that. Again, when it comes to Burke, we've seen him catch the ball downfield. I don't think there's any doubt that he can do that. The question is going to be all the little things and that sort of stuff.
Consistency.
But it's good to see. And look, they're gonna need guys to step up this year at the wide receiver position, and Burke is going to be a big part of that if Florida's going to be successful.
I know he didn't have a big day on the stat sheet, but Andy Jean, the couple times he got the ball in his hand, he looked like he flashed a little bit.
Well, you're always making fun of me with Gene. It's always like he ran a great route, and they show like an out during the spring game or something.
That's like during practice when people are like, "Man, great out route." I'm like, he's running out of air, guys. The cuts look good. He's a great athlete. He plays at Florida.
Look,
I think there was there's one highlight going around of him putting on a good juke move, but he's got to be that quick guy. You talk about the screen game. He'd be a guy I like to see catch some screen passes this year. Let's get Henderson out running downfield. I'd like to see Gene get a couple screen passes this year.
I'll be honest. Out of the 3 wide receivers this year, the freshmen coming in, I want to see one guy turn into like an all SEC freshman level player. Rather than force feeding the 3 of them. I think if Mizell is that guy, then get him all the reps you can and get him in that place where he's that freshman all SEC. It's really unusual that you're going to have 3 guys come in at the receiver position who get immediate playing time and are able to really drive change on the offensive side of the ball. And with Pearsall and Henderson, unless those guys get injured, knocking on wood, I don't think those guys are going to get a ton of time unless they're able to push their way through. Mizell has the skills to be able to do that. Gene does as well. And Eugene Wilson, who isn't here yet, he may have those skills as well. But if we're relying on 3 true freshmen at wide receiver and really looking at their development as reasons for hope in this year, I think that's probably an issue. Like we like if we have one guy who steps up, like if you think about like the Antonio Callaway year where he comes in as a freshman, doing all sorts of stuff all over the place, but there were solid receivers also in the fold in addition to Callaway. That's what I think you want to be looking for. And look, I get it. We know that people have to step up, so we're sort of looking everywhere for it. But if all 3 of those guys are major contributors this year, something's probably going wrong on the Florida offensive side of the ball, either with injuries or with something else. Because I think what you really want to see is one guy take a step up, a couple of guys make some decent contributions in a couple of games, and then sort of just go from there.
Well, the biggest announcement on the night came at halftime from XAVIER Filsaime, 6'1", 180-pound, 5-star safety out of McKinney, Texas, ranked the 2nd best safety in the nation. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, 2 of the top 7 players in Texas now committed to the Gators for the 2024 cycle, joining DJ Lagway, who's also out of Texas there. Filsaime will watch this tape. He's a safety that likes to step up there. Like he can hit, he can cover. His speed is unbelievable. He just goes sideline to sideline. You see him track down guys at incredible angles from across the field. That really, a couple times he had no business catching a couple different players that he ended up catching. But I love this tape. I think he's another big time get for Billy Napier, just proving that the future is bright for Florida. I know we're painting a little bit of a bleak picture for 2023 with some of the stuff we're talking about here, but the future is definitely bright, and this is more evidence of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the 2024 class is awesome at this point. I mean, you think about it, you got Lagway, Filsaime, Miles Graham, Adarius Hayes, all top 50 guys for all 4 recruiting services. I think Adarius Hayes is like 70th ranked in one of them, but other than that, he's top 50 in all of them. Depending upon where you go, the 24/7 composite has Filsaime, Graham, and Hayes as composite 4 stars. DJ Lagway is a composite 5-star. But look, what we really talk about when you and I are on here is top 50, right? Like those are sort of the elite of the elite. That's the stuff that's been missing in all of Billy Napier's recruiting classes so far. He's got 4 of them now. He had 2 in the first two recruiting classes that he had. Top 50 guys who were consensus composite 5-star guys. You add to that Chauncey Bowens and then a guy we're going to get to in a second at running back and Josiah Davis at safety. Davis is actually an interesting case because he's a 3-star ranked 513th overall. Really, really good prospect. But when you think about having Filsaime in the fold as well, Davis makes a ton more sense, right? Because you're bringing in a guy who's going to come in, is willing to redshirt, who's willing to sort of learn behind a guy like Filsaime who's going to get early playing time. And I think that's a big thing here is that clearly Napier is able to sell early playing time because his entire team this year is basically freshmen, redshirt freshmen, sophomores, and redshirt sophomores. So there is a lot to talk about in terms of we got young guys playing and you're going to have an opportunity to play. Filsaime's been a Florida lean for a pretty long time, but to have it happen during the spring game, the fact that they've got 4 top 50 guys before it even really becomes time for like recruits to really start hitting. Like it's not till August or September that you start looking at recruiting classes and saying, hey, this is a big deal. But Florida now 3rd overall in average player ranking, tied with Georgia. They're just behind Alabama, but Alabama only has 4 commits. Georgia has 12, Florida now with 7. So where this class is headed really brings a lot of hope. And that's one of the things, look, you look at the young guys, what they were able to contribute in defense in the spring game, and then here's what's coming. Filsaime, Graham, and Hayes. We're about to get some athletes at linebacker and safety who are going to be added in to the guys who've already been brought in. And look, I've been critical of Napier's recruiting because 14th isn't good enough to compete with Georgia and Alabama on a regular basis, but it should be good enough to beat, Kentucky and Tennessee and South Carolina and all those sorts of teams. And so Napier's going to win a lot of games with these guys. These guys, though, are the type that put you up over the top. Like these are the guys who end up in the NFL after 3 years. These are the guys who come in as true freshmen and you say, oh yeah, good. That guy can't be drafted yet. He's still got years of eligibility. And I want to say the last guy that happened to for Florida was Kyer Elam. And before that was CJ Henderson. And other than that, I can't remember a guy who was like coming off of his sophomore year. And we're like, oh yeah, he still has 1 more year, but he would be you think about the defensive end for Alabama.
Will Anderson,
yep. Where after his sophomore season, he would have been the number 1 pick in the draft, but he wasn't eligible to go. So he comes back this year and plays again. That's the sort of player that's being added. Filsaime fits that profile. You think about guys like Ed Reed, guys like Reggie Nelson, the way he flies around in the field, the way you've described it. That's the kind of player you're getting. If he can step in day one, all of a sudden Florida with Kamari Wilson, Miguel Mitchell, Filsaime, and then Josiah Davis sort of backing that up, you're getting a really, really strong defensive back room at a position that's becoming more and more and more important given the diversity of offenses that are around college football.
Yeah, he's not afraid to step into the gap too and fill the hole because that's half of his highlight tape is him just stepping in, taking on a running back head on. He doesn't seem like he has much regard for his body when he's playing out there. So he's a fun physical player to watch and certainly seems like hey, the other part too, Will, Texas base. Texas and Texas A&M, they haven't made any noise on the recruiting trail in the last couple of years, have they? We're going into Texas. We're taking these guys out of Texas, bringing them over to Florida. You're going into enemy territory and getting it done, especially with Texas coming over into the SEC. You got A&M already in the SEC. Yeah, hey, I think that's just showing it's what Georgia does too. Georgia goes anywhere in the country they want, and they just go get the best players right now, right? Alabama's been doing that for years. Billy Napier, it's great to get the guys in your backyard. We certainly stress that. We talk about that. We're in a state that's populated with a lot of great talent. Georgia and Alabama certainly seem to think so because they come down here enough for it. But at the same time, they also go all over the country to get the best players. This is a perfect example of that. This is a good example of Napier being able to deliver on what we were hoping for. And we didn't see as much at the beginning of his tenure last year. We all know how the class went, where it picked up down the stretch a little bit. It started a little slow, picked up a little bit as it went. But, man, just coming out on fire with this class and another big pickup going into Texas, Will.
Well, so if you look at the rumblings that have come out of Florida, it has been that NIL took the organization a little bit by surprise, that the inflation that was occurring from NIL, that sort of the craziness associated with NIL, certainly the chaos that was around Jaden Rashada, I think indicates that that is true. I don't think it's a coincidence that Filsaime commits the same day that they announce the Florida Victorious NIL that's sort of now annexing the Gator Collective and becoming the unified NIL space for the Florida Gators, and a place where now there are professional people who are in charge. And look, I think the Gator Collective tried to do a really nice thing. I think in many ways they set the groundwork for what Florida's NIL is going to be. At the same time, NIL at this point is a full-time position for anyone. It's fundraising. It's making sure that you have all the connections you need. It's now, because of some of the Florida laws that have been passed, interfacing with the coaching staff to understand their needs and wants and how they value players and all those sorts of things. And so Florida has set that up, and all of a sudden recruiting picks up. I don't think this is, look, Florida was in the top 3 of a top 3 class. if they'd have landed half the guys that they were in the top 3 for, and maybe even the top 2 for, we would have been raving about Napier's class last year. The problem is all those guys, Cormani McLean and Okunlola and all those guys who were sitting there in that category decided to go someplace else. And given some of the rumblings that were out there, sometimes that was NIL related, not all the time, but sometimes that was NIL related. The fact that there's now a cohesive plan, a cohesive, professionally run organization to interface with Florida, I think is going a long way. And the relationship aspect that Billy Napier brought to the table is now starting to pay dividends from the standpoint of, because NIL is no longer a detriment, you are able to now bring in these guys. I think that's what this is an indication of. I think the fact that you've got these high level elite guys coming is that they've been able to merge both of those things together in a way that in the first 2 classes they weren't able to do. So very, very, very encouraging news on the recruiting front.
A little plug for our buddy Dave Waters there over at Gators Breakdown, an interview with Florida Victorious last week. So if you want more information on that, check out that interview on Gators Breakdown. All right, let's move on here. Close it out with $1. Kahnen Daniels, running back, 5'11", 190 pounds, out of West Point, Mississippi. And the first thing I thought when I watched this highlight tape is, this is a bit repetitive. You talk about the guys lining up at quarterback, but you go back to memories of Ronnie Brown running the Wildcat for the 2008 Tony Sperano Dolphins there. And he's not the quickest guy. He's not the most physical guy, but he still manages to break a bunch of explosive runs and completely run over people. I saw one clip, Will. I think I sent you the screenshots of it, breaking it down, because it was just an incredible, it was an incredible clip here. He jumps over a guy, stiff arms another dude, and then trucks one more player on the way to the end zone on about a 50-yard touchdown run. Just a steady player when it comes, and at this point, when it comes to running backs, until proven otherwise, this is, for me, I trust Napier implicitly with this. Is Napier has a knack for finding great running backs back to his days. They were producing NFL running backs on a regular basis at Louisiana. You look at Montrell Johnson stepping right in last year, Etienne as a freshman producing. Carroll looked fantastic the other night. Anytime Napier puts a stamp on a running back, I'm just going to automatically get excited from here on out, Will.
Well, I mean, I think there are reasons to be excited beyond just that. I mean, the guy averaged 10 yards per carry over like 200 carries last year, right? Yeah. So high workload, high efficiency. So whether or not you're seeing some giant, like, Dalvin Cook type explosivity is less important than the fact that he's wiggly enough that he's getting 10 yards a carry. Now, obviously that starts to come down once you get into college football, because everybody has the skills to be able to track you down. The tackling's a lot better. At the same time, like he's not a running back, right? He's been playing a lot of quarterback type of stuff, like you said, wildcat running. But great. Right. I mean, that you don't necessarily, like, Napier's offense doesn't need Barry Sanders. In fact, it might cause problems. Well, Barry Sanders could play in any offense, but
yeah, we could take Barry Sanders. I'm okay with it.
But to be able to put your foot in the ground and go north south and then run somebody over, that's something that's a specific skill. You start thinking about like the Denver Broncos, who drafted guys in the 4th, 5th, and 6th round over and over and over again, and then were able to find guys like Terrell Davis. But then there were other guys who were less skilled than Davis who were able to really excel in that space. You think about Clinton Portis, who excelled, and then they traded him to Washington for Champ Bailey, which was like an absolute fleecing, because when Portis got to Washington, all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's not in the same scheme. It doesn't work the same way. So I think scheme goes a long way here in terms of being able to have these running backs who are successful. Napier, again, from a planning perspective, because he's his own offensive coordinator, he can bring in 2 offensive line coaches, which then allows you to really focus on the details. You look at what NFL teams are doing with the 49ers right now, with the Rams right now, those sorts of offenses. That's the kind of offense that Florida's trying to build. And look, this is a guy who's going to be able to contribute to that. He's not a can't miss prospect, but a running back ranked 350th. That's not a guy that you look at and say he can't turn out and turn into an elite player. Those guys get drafted about 15 to 20% of the time, and running backs specifically, oftentimes are difficult to evaluate because the offensive and defensive lines in Mississippi are very different than the offensive and defensive lines in Florida and Texas and California and those sorts of things. And so, look, somebody who averages 10 yards a carry, like you said, because of his background and because of his track record, I think at running back more than anything, you probably really trust Billy Napier there. But I wouldn't be excited about Daniels without the 4 guys at the top, but Daniels is an enormous addition because you need to fill out your roster with those types of guys. And so this isn't a can't miss prospect, but this is a guy who absolutely can be an NFL player. And so, we talk about all the time that recruits are lottery tickets, that you're playing probabilities. And so this is a big part. Guys who are ranked 350th, 400, 250, those are a big part of having a class that ends up ranked number 1, 2, or 3, because you have those elite prospects, and then you have to fill out the back end with guys who are going to pan out, 15, 20% of the time, and really be the crux of what your roster is going to be as you try to win a championship.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Will, does it feel like we're getting a little spoiled here with recruiting? Because we're getting to the point where I feel like we're looking up every week, and we're getting the way they roll it out. They do such a good job of keeping Florida in the news cycle with this. I feel like every week you got something new rolling out here the last several weeks. And I feel like Napier and his staff, they know what they're doing. They know how to control that. And they're just leaking it out slowly here. But it seems like a lot more good to come with this 2024 class.
Look, it's April, right? It's early. Yeah. And so one of the things that anybody who's read my stuff realizes is that there's a lot of variability in recruiting classes, either from a point total or an average player rating very early on. It starts to settle down around August or September, and that average player rating is where you end up. So if they go get commits from 5 3-stars over the next 3 months, well, okay, we're kind of right back to where we were. Even though you've got these elite guys, you've got elite guys and then a bunch of 3-stars, and I think I'd rather have that than sort of guys who are all ranked in the hundreds, but you're not competing with Alabama and Georgia at that point. Now, if he adds two more 5-stars, maybe one of these guys jumps up into the 5-star territory. You mentioned Filsaime is a 5-star ranked in
24/7
in a couple of the services, right? And so if you add a couple of more 5-stars, if he jumps up into the 5-star, if you add a couple of guys in the 120 to 130 range, well, all of a sudden, you're looking at that going into August or September, saying this could be a monster recruiting class. And, to me, that's always been the thing, is the reason I got frustrated with Dan Mullen wasn't necessarily the results on the field the year that he decided to leave, or the year that Florida decided to make him leave. The thing that was frustrating was that was the future, because we had 4 straight years of recruiting at that level. And so you looked at it and said, Kyle Pitts was sort of a McElwain recruit that he managed to convince to stay. Emory Jones was his hand-picked quarterback. Kadarius Toney was a guy who was brought in by McElwain. So the McElwain guys were the guys who excelled, and all of a sudden now the guys he brought in weren't succeeding. And since there weren't any elite can't miss guys in there, you required development. We weren't seeing development. And so there wasn't really any reason to see patience. This is a reason to be patient, right? Like if we have a bad year this year, or even if next year things aren't right where we want, the fact that DJ Lagway and Austin Simmons are sitting there and waiting at the quarterback position, the fact that you got Miles Graham and Adarius Hayes who are going to be able to join Shamar James and Deuce Spurlock at the linebacker position, the fact that you're going to have Xavier Filsaime joining Kamari Wilson at the safety position, all of a sudden you look at it and go, oh, like
Stacking.
we're gonna have talent everywhere. We're going to be able to. The day I really look forward to is the day where you and I are writing a preview magazine where we're not saying if we have an injury here, it will be catastrophic. Because last year you and I both looked at it and said, man, if Gervon Dexter goes down, ooh, is that defense screwed? And then it turned out that Gervon Dexter just had to play so many plays that by the second half he was ineffective because he was out there all the time, which was kind of the same thing, right? And so to not have to say that at some point along the way will be great. So I look at this right now and I say, very, very encouraged. Got to finish the deal, and then have to finish the deal the year after, and the year after that, and the year after that. Because Nick Saban ain't stopping, Kirby Smart ain't stopping it, and so Billy Napier can't stop. These recruits, awesome news. We should be very, very excited. But we need to have that excitement and have that momentum and push it forward into 2025, 2026, 2027, because that's the reality, is that you have to stack these things one on top of each other every year. It never stops. It's never good enough. You got to go when it comes to bringing in elite guys.
Well, you just feel it starting to shift a little bit, though, don't you, Will? That's the good news. So
hey, we were in the final two, and these guys,
here.
we were in the final two, and these guys chose us. Right. In the past, Florida's had guys in the final two or final three, and they've chosen elsewhere. And so the tide has definitely turned. Got to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next Tall Tales out on Tuesday. The 1982 Southern Cal Trojans come into Florida Field to face Charlie Pell and the Gators. The Gators make a big statement on a national stage. Will, where can people find the link for the magazine?
Well, so first off, a lot of positive feedback on the Tall Tales. We appreciate that. Nick put a lot of hard work into that. He's the storyteller. I'm the nerd. And so we make a pretty good combination, but it's been kind of cool to see something that's specifically just storytelling. So if you like sort of narrative around, Florida famous games, if you were there for that 97 game in the Swamp against Florida State, really the greatest game ever played is sort of the way it's monikered. Maybe you weren't there and you want to sort of understand what people are talking about and what they felt. You can go check that out. Again, if you're maybe a little bit older, you'll remember that USC game, but just think about that USC being at the Swamp, and thinking through that. So Tall Tales has been really interesting, really entertaining. I'm looking forward to all the rest of those that are coming out. Yes, back to what you said. The magazine, readandreaction.com/mag. Pre-order by May 1st. You get a discounted rate. After May 1st, the rate's going to go up. If you want it by Memorial Day, you got to get that ordered by May 1st. Otherwise, it may be a little bit after that. Certainly, if you want a digital copy, you can get it over there as well. You're not beholden to having a hard copy, but we'd love to give it to you if you can. And again, that's readandreaction.com/mag.
readandreaction.com/mag. Have a great weekend, everyone, and go Gators.
Go Gators. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.